Yes, but that's not it. It's whatever's happening now.
G'day.
Hello.
So nice to meet you, Christine.
Get the other actors out of the way. Hang on, let me turn my thing down, so my volume down, so it doesn't echo.
The background blue.
How does that sound?
Awesome. Welcome to People Purpose Place. For our normal Monday lunchtime catch up. And I think we've got everyone back, which is pretty cool. And we'll see how that rolls, because historically that started well, but we haven't always ended that way. So, but we'll take the start as it comes. So, Darren, Rowan, and Christine here. How are you guys going for the day?
Full of vim and vigour at the start of the week, so we get a bit crushed by the end of the week, but we're starting off strong today.
It's really
Have
good.
yourself, Christine. Distracted by 1,000 moving bits of technology. And you turned your volume down.
Or you might have muted yourself. Still can't hear you.
I'm having the opposite effect. Are we
Yeah, no, we're good.
the opposite effect to Rowan? So Rowan's starting at the beginning of the week like this and heading downhill, and I'm starting downhill and hoping to go there.
Excellent.
And we'll meet in the middle somewhere around Wednesday.
Yeah, it makes sense. So we've got our episode today is, we think, number 39. We'd have to go back and count to make sure of that, but we're calling it 39. People Purpose Place has 3 words in it, and the last one is place. So what's this place we talk about is today's discussion, which should be interesting stuff. So we're going to talk specifically about, what could be some options. And I think, Rowan, you were very wise earlier on today, we're having a bit of chat, is that we'll put a couple of versions up of different buildings that have been built over the years. And people will probably have some fairly instant reactions to some of them, right? So, and some of them might be aesthetic, some of them might be micro detail about locations of things. But they're all examples that were done for a reason. And I think that's what we want to discuss today, really, more than anything, which is trying to think about designing with intent for a reason, which we might discuss soon about, how many houses in Australia are actually done with that in mind. But so today's episode, we're going to look about what places could be. And quite often people jump to this when we start talking about being a not-for-profit that's involved in housing, solving the housing crisis. A lot of people are jumping towards, hey, what are these solutions? Tell me what these things look like. We unfortunately tend to answer a question with a question, which gets people a bit frustrated. But the question we actually ask is, well, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's your intent by doing this? What's the actual problem you're trying to solve? So that's a little bit where we'll go to today, and show some examples to hopefully get people to think about what they think about, what they actually need, and what their intent is with their design. So modeling like we always do, got a bit of a check-in question here. We're talking today about places and buildings. So can you articulate to me a place that felt like home?
Christine, do you want to jump in?
Can you start, Rowan? I've still got a bit of background noise. I'm going to mute for 2 seconds while that finishes up, and then I'll jump on.
Awesome. Well, in my experience, places that have felt home have been a place where I raised kids. So I spent time kicking a soccer ball in the backyard, watching a dog grow up, and the kids interact with, how do we look after an animal, and all the lumps and bumps that go with a family life. So that wasn't a particularly fancy place, but definitely resonated as home. It's the place where Dad blew himself up a few times and built a tree house and played with the dog in the backyard.
Yeah, awesome. You're right to go now, Christine.
so. I think you might hear the leftovers of a bit of noise, but I hope that it's not too intrusive. Let me know if it is. Yeah, it's a tricky one for me to answer right now because I've just been doing some deep work on my relationship with my parents. Here I am, almost 74, and I'm still digging through with my psychotherapist what happened all those years ago, and
Yeah.
why didn't home feel like home? and, and I think the first time I really had a home that felt like home is moving into the house I live in now, which I've now had to leave because of my health, because
Yeah,
it's a mold house and I've got mold. So isn't that interesting that I've picked an old house because it felt homey, whereas the brand new house that I mostly was brought up in
Mm.
felt like an institution. It was beautiful,
Yes.
yes.
but it was a little bit like living in the MoMA, in the Museum of Modern Art, or something like that. It wasn't
Mm.
meant to be dogs and kids and roughhousing and doing stuff. And
Living your life. Mm.
in fact, we did build forts and things in the back 40, but the house itself felt very cold and unhomey. So to me, anything that's too perfect isn't a home. And anything that doesn't have that, exactly what Rowan was describing, the human interaction, that isn't home.
Yeah. And I was going to, in going last, I got to ask all the hard questions and get all the good answers. But I was a bit drawn to when I actually wrote this question out, and I'll come back to a little bit about the question. But when I wrote this question out, my initial thought was my childhood. So, and the main place we grew up in, which surprisingly enough, if you go and have a look at now, like it's, I don't know if anyone knows Townsville, but it used to be called Ross River Road. I'm not quite sure what it's called now. I think it might be Riverway Drive or something like that. And we were literally right on the road, right? Way up in the end of it. And across from us was the river. Like we literally had ourselves a 1-lane road or 2-lane road and then the river. Now, you go there now and it's actually got 4 lanes right across the front of your house, right? It's literally right there. And we were at that where from being in the middle of nowhere to being, right in the middle of the jungle. Probably dropped half of its value. Once upon a time, it was this beautiful thing overlooking the water, and by the time it was sold, it was, having cars race by there all times of the night. But that aside, it was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home that Dad renovated and did some pretty cool, funky things in different areas. As my dad's a little bit of an innovator from that point of view, as far as doing stuff himself, which might have washed off a little bit. But I can still just remember that sense of that sense of feeling at home. Safety, I think, is one of those things. Being able to go in the backyard and run around and all of those sorts of things. But just a sense of a felt sense. And I think that's what you alluded to there, Christina's sometimes you're going to have a clinical building that doesn't feel like home. And then you can literally have, like we had, it was a high set shit box that felt like home. Yeah. So I actually put that question a little bit on purpose because we're going to start talking about places, but we've just said they don't actually mean anything. So it's almost counterintuitive our conversation we're going to have, because without the people, they don't actually equate to anything other than a structure.
No, I just want to throw something in here. They've done some research on what people think were the golden era, like for everybody who wants to go backwards to where their golden era was. For everybody, it's when they're a teenager. Now, that means that for me, the golden era was the 1960s. Indeed, I had a lot of fun in the 60s. I had a lot of misery, but I had a lot of fun. And for each of you, it'll be another decade later. And for the young people listening, it might be several decades later, but it's always about your sense of when you were creating your sense of yourself, just like your home was the place that you felt you were creating your sense of home. Isn't
Yeah,
it fascinating? People think the good old days were when I was a teenager.
yeah. It is fascinating. And I actually just had
That's
this conversation. Hunter and I were driving out to the block a couple of weeks ago, and he actually made a comment. Like, as a 20-year-old man, you're like, he's
Yeah.
barely out of school, relatively. He said to me, I wish I could just get one extra day back in high school, like in grade 12.
Right.
So it's funny how your father, enjoy your school and you'll regret not, blah. And he's going, yeah, whatever, idiot, and now literally 3 years later, he's going, just one more day with those
One more
blokes
day
talking crap
of the golden era.
of the golden era, as you've just
And
pointed out.
nobody else would call one more day of 2020 the golden era.
No, you're right.
Except people who were teenagers at that time.
And that's actually more poignant when you think about it. That was in the middle of COVID, but it was still the golden era. Like, so it's connection, it's safety, it's that forming yourself. So, we're going to talk about places and bits, which is interesting, but we need to just put the lens on it at the front that the reason we call this place People Purpose Place is because those two things actually come before the place. And your sense of connection and your sense of yourself is related to people, it's not related to bits. So that's awesome.
It's related to the people.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a bit of a question to lean into that a little bit, Rowan. So I know your background's in logistics and you've worked with products and materials and those sorts of things. And that's probably exposed you to a vast amount of builders and practitioners and that sort of stuff. Do you sort of, when we're talking about building with intent, do you get a bit of a sense of how many homes or residential buildings in Australia are built with an intent or a design philosophy or whatever?
Would that be the purpose? Yeah, I mean, you're talking about people wanting their house or to create a home.
Yeah.
So the people and the purpose, yeah. Go on.
Yeah.
I would hazard a guess that there are.
Whoops, Rowan's frozen, has he? Bye.
Yep, he's got a little X there, which normally says he's frozen. So it's going to be a beautiful answer, but no one's going to.
But we have to wait for it. We have to wait until we see back in the golden era.
Let me back in.
Yeah, you're right now. Oh, yeah, you're right now. Go again. We said it was a beautiful presentation, but no one in the world heard it. So go again.
So my impression is, because we use the definition of a home as opposed to a house.
Yeah.
That there's about 200,000 houses built each year, very roughly speaking. And I suspect you could count on one hand, if any of them, that many, have been built with the intention to be a home. They are built with all sorts of intentions. I think at least 80% of them are built with purely economic and financial reasons, which is not at all about being a home. It's about rent, investment, capital gain, blah, blah, blah reasons. And I had an interesting conversation on Talkback Radio yesterday or Saturday where they're talking about this housing crisis. And I said, we can't even articulate what a human benefit is of these structures that we're talking about. So if we can't get beyond finance and economics, there is no intention to deliver a home. The evidence is that certainly more than 80% of homes have no design input. They are just manufactured to fit on this block of land. And then they're manufactured to fit this economic answer. So this price point or this profit return or this rental yield, essentially how we do housing, which is a tragedy because the human benefit of having homes where people are facilitating people thriving is actually very doable. we can absolutely design with that intent in mind, and the benefit for our community, just thinking about that, has to be enormous. So
Yeah.
that to me,
Actually, even had a thought there, and this is not for today's conversation, but while we're here together, that might be the most poignant way to answer any concerns a council might have in regards to something we're proposing, is we're truly designing this to be a home.
Yeah.
No more conversation. We're designing this to be a home.
Exactly.
And that might be the most poignant way we could ever put it. So I agree with you, Rowan. How many houses are designed for people in the first place? The answer is not many. What if we're actually designing this absolutely to be a home?
Yes.
And the few examples, sorry.
There's just one more thing to throw in there, that very clearly the house I grew up in was not even the biggest driver was not finance. It certainly wasn't creating I'm sure my parents thought they were creating a home for their family.
Yeah.
But I think that its main purpose was to signal status.
Yep.
So you're talking about 200,000 houses built yearly in Australia, and only a few of them are actually designer built. The designer built ones, I'm going to guess, are more likely to be signals of status than they are to be built with the purpose of being a home.
People who operate at that level, Christine, so they're multi-million-dollar properties, and they have extensive annual holidays, they have work commitments that take them around. They don't actually live there the whole time, and they probably are not intergenerational households with a collection of kids and a collection of grandparents. They're absolutely people who have capacity to go on this journey about status and sea views or whatever, not realizing that they do 100 hours a week, they can never see the sea after dark when they get home, and the two of them living in this 500 square meter thing need an intercom to find their partner. So that's actually the reality of what those things often deliver, as opposed to a home and thriving interpersonal relationships.
And I think there's actually a deeper conversation there to be had as well, which is, interestingly enough, the other 80% are still built because of status. So interestingly enough, one thing that I realized, and this is just an observation which has taken me a long time to get to, is whenever I tried to convince people that sustainability was an important design facet, most people got lost, right? And it was only after a period of time that I realized that the reason most people are buying a home is because it's a cultural norm. So in Australia, we have, the great Australian dream, all of these things. So on some level, every house purchase is an identifier of who you are in our society. So if you can purchase a home, then you can absolutely move forward to be seen as someone in our society. So young people have a drive, you form a couple. The next step for you is, a ring, a marriage, and some children, and a house is part of that. The nesting process is actively a live part of that process. So unfortunately, our culture has actually formed a mentality that every house is really a part of our status in our society. And the people with the houses have a higher status than the people without the houses. And then the people with the massive houses, as we just talked about, have even greater status. And actually, in the last week, Rowan and I, we've been talking about this, but it's actually quite soul destroying on some level to go that when you reach the point of going, none of this actually matters, and the people who are actually good people who are trying to do really important, difficult work have to leave behind the desire to have that big one, because that's completely misaligned with good values as a person. So yeah, I think there's people underestimate what part of our makeup of our own individual self and society is tied up in housing. You know, people throw the housing crisis over the top, but there's a lot more depth in this challenge, as we've talked about. You know, ego and how you see yourself in relation to everyone else, status, all of that sort of stuff tied up in there as well. So that's been a really good intro, and I think we've highlighted the importance of the separation of the bits from the actual people. So what I thought we might do, basically with that in mind, is actually just go and have a look at a couple of different versions which are divergent from the standard home. So we use these acronyms, and we have the old 4x2x2, which is what the industry uses as its bread and butter sort of staple product, which means 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2 garages is generally the bulk of the housing stock that enters the market. Primarily the reason for that, and I even had this discussion with the bank in the last week, is not actually because anyone is asking for a 4x2x2. It's a combination of 2 factors. One is people are being marketed to so that they have an aspirational goal to be in the suburbs in this white picket fenced version of a modern home, which is 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2 garages. So there's a marketing front. And then there's secondly, financing. So the financing process is underpinned by the idea that if you can compare your home to someone else's home, then the banks have a lot of security in regards to if they have to throw you out to sell it, they know that yours will be worth somewhat comparable to the one next door. If we've all built the same thing, it makes it easy to buy and sell, and it makes it easy for the banks to hold their understanding of what the value of your asset is. So
they're just a financial commodity.
They are 100%. So the person has never been thought about in either of those 2 options. Either you're marketed to try and sell something to make you feel aspirational and keeping up with the Joneses, as that wonderful saying has got, or essentially it's a financial institution mechanism to maintain value and transferable wealth, is essentially those 2 elements. So what Colby's going to do is just circulate a few different versions of alternative housing models through, because we're discussing the housing crisis. That's one thing that we've been talking about. So what are solutions that could be applied? And also that there is no perfect solution. Like all these things we're going to float through here, there's going to be people who have instant reactions to them of, yes, that feels like a great solution, or no, that's a horrible outcome. How could you ever live in anything like that? But all of them have pros and cons. And this process is not to get you to find your solution. It's actually to challenge the way you think about living. Because we just
that there is different to the whole standard response.
Correct.
That may not be perfect for you, but there are options that work.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we just articulated that the building actually has nothing to do with your sense of being home. So is it about affordability? Is it about connectivity? Is it about all of these things? So Colby, if you're there, I think we started with the first one, which was a pavilion design. Yeah. Great timing. So ultimately, this was actually a display home we built some time ago in a development in Townsville called North Shore. So it was actually quite interesting because architecturally, architects love this idea of a pavilion design. So you can see this, which is essentially broken up into pods. So you can see in this situation that you essentially have a 4-bedroom home like the standard home, but it is really broken up into 4 elements. So 2 bedroom wings, a connector in the middle, and then a living area wing at the back, and then the mandatory garage. Well, not mandatory, but certainly part of the covenant in most new developments is to have this garage. And you'll notice the garage is slightly stepped back. That's also part of the philosophy of not making the garage so prominent in most new developments, as it sometimes had become. So the design intent with this was really to look at pod style living. So you could essentially close down sections of the home if they were no longer usable. So if you're a young family and you basically have yourself and your baby, well, then, having the child quite close to you in a bedroom 4 might make a lot of sense. And the other element, which the designer at the time, which we talked a lot about, was Brad Cross from Jazz Designs, who actually operated at Brisbane. From a design point of view, we were looking at also this tarp over a tent concept with that solar atrium in the middle. So the idea of this design is to allow the breeze to come through the center of the design and then any heat to be released out through the solar atrium in the middle. So we were out there dancing around with some quite interesting design ideas. Something as an observation is we had a very radical version of this to start off with, which is what I wanted to build. I actually went and road tested it through most of the people who I worked with, and all of them were petrified by this design. And that was because it wasn't petrified.
Yeah. What scared them?
They really didn't like the idea of having to come into the open to pass anywhere else.
Really?
So the solar atrium component was basically originally just going to be a float over roof. And that basically meant that you had to come out into the open to pass from a bedroom to the laundry or a bedroom to the living area pod. But when you think about how what we have people ask us for now, which is a sense of independence, but a sense of connectedness, the design is actually what a lot of people are asking for when you want to have people live together in a home. So what do you generally think of with pavilion designs, right? Like, what was your feedback of that home when you walked through it?
I guess my original response from a material point of view said, winner, there's all this additional external walls, which means all this additional external wall materials. And that was the mindset from which I looked at the property on my first appearance. And that leads into selling product view of the space.
Yep.
And then I started to realize that, hang on, we're not conditioning the vast amount of in-connected spaces. So now for living, I really realized that, okay, if the kids are home and doing quiet kid in their bedroom activity, you're conditioning a really small space, which makes a huge cost of living impact in North Queensland, because you don't want to air condition the whole footprint. If you can condition a small space, that makes a lot more sense. So some of that, my view was material and the practicalities of it.
Great observation. And I hadn't pointed that out. And I remember, in actual fact, when I think, Christine, we might have actually talked about this design years and years ago. And we were talking about cost of some of these things. And I remember just vaguely me trying to explain one of the challenges with the pod style design, while it's beautiful and works, is you end up with all of these outside walls, right? So we have a lot more, and there's a ratio there somewhere, and we could work it out, but how many linear meters of external wall, which is the expensive part, which is why, the company Rowan was working for, James Hardy, was going, yes, give me more external walls.
Give me more of this. We can sell lots of product.
Absolutely. And it made it really very, very strong too. So if you have lots of external walls, from a cyclone resilience point of view, my parents always said to me, if a cyclone shows up, go to the smallest room in the house, right? That was something that North Queenslanders just used to talk about in cyclones. So the design has all of these massive reasons why it works, particularly for tropical environments. But I found it really intriguing that psychologically a lot of people really struggled with the idea of pavilion living.
So were they worried about being exposed when they went outdoors? Or like you're skipping from your bedroom to the laundry. I've only got my undies on because I just realized the piece of clothing I took off I wanted to put in that load of laundry, and you just, if it were inside that wouldn't be a problem. If you had to go outside it would be a problem. Is that I'm not quite sure what people are they feeling exposed by being.
I don't think I really ever quite got to the answer to it. And I mean, I think it was always, and yeah, thanks, Colby. That makes a lot of sense. So, and I think one of the things, so you'll see that laundry connector there where they got laundry, powder room, linen. I only added that under objection. So when I designed the rest of the house, and I was like, I love this pavilion idea. It gives you a really good sense of inside, outside. The block was big enough that you could have your sense of, you'll still notice that there's not a lot of big windows looking to the neighbors. Mm-hmm. So my thought was you could do the nudie run and no one's actually going to see it.
No.
But I had to actually put in that laundry complex because people just felt like it was, you couldn't, people had this, even I have had so many people say to me, oh, but if I arrive with the groceries and it's raining, I won't be able to get to the kitchen. And I'm like, what the hell? You're seriously changing.
The thinking is nuts, isn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely going to change your whole house under the pretext of something that might happen once a year, maybe. But literally that was the thinking. And so I don't have an answer for you, Christine, other than that is all I could come to point with is they felt more exposed to coming inside and outside, which either was getting wet occasionally if you're passing from one spot to another, or potentially having a nudie run issue where if you caught from one spot to the other. But that's actually why we heavily landscaped those areas in their final design. We ended up putting essentially all the atriums were closed off with landscaping. So even when you were outside, you were still inside. But interestingly enough, maybe we just become so conditioned to feel like we're protected by walls that when we go outside, people feel intimidated by it. But then you also go, why then just about every workshop we have ever run, people always talk about we want to be reconnected with nature. But we're being locked in a house.
And maybe we just don't do enough of being in nature, fending off the saber-toothed tiger to actually sit there comfortably.
Yeah.
So the lack of time we spend outdoors, which only got worse, right, with COVID. We spent more time indoors in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So saber-toothed tigers have been left in the outside to run wild with no human interaction because we all retreated indoors. Maybe it's as simple as that. I don't know.
And I think the good thing is that really we've talked a fair bit about, and you picked up some great points there in regards to conditioning and that sort of stuff. So that was that house's intent. Now, if you were going to live with that intent, and you were going to go with that, you'd be going, this is the perfect home. Like I can zone off sections. I don't have to air condition the whole thing. I can have a connection with the environment. If I want to live in a section, I can be in that section. If my older children arrive back home after being away, they're not all up in my grill. So my house at the moment is designed I designed a 15-year-olds. Now I have 20-year-olds. Its intent doesn't work because they're coming into the spaces. Now that house there, like, boys, see you later. Like, do whatever you want. Like, and we can come together when we want to come together, but we don't have to be all up in each other's grill all the time. So if you had wanted that intent, it would have made sense. So got the next one there, Colby. Whatever you grab, we can probably talk to. Yeah. Okay. So this was probably a house which, of its time, was well and truly ahead of the curve. So this was actually some people that originally came, and as quite often, this just needs to be honestly discussed. It was a situation where the young couple had a baby, only quite young, and then maybe 2 years old or around that age, I think from memory. But realistically, their mother was living with them, and she had the money, right? So they were trying to find a way to balance this idea of how do we find a way to live together, but also have enough of our own independence that we can live together forever. So this house was really one of the first versions, and I think it would be in the early 2010s, maybe around that stage, that I started to have people who intentionally were thinking about multi-generational living. So that's, 10 or 15 years ago that people were starting to think about this. So you will, once you break down this design and you initially go, wow, that's just a lot of stuff going on. But if you come back and look at what makes this a house in difference to being a duplex or any of those things, you notice right in the heart of the design is the laundry. And there is only one laundry. And it is essentially shared as being really the connector of this building. So potentially in today's world, this would be called an attached granny flat. So the bit out to the right is actually where the mother lived in this situation. So she had what would be bedrooms 4 and 5 around a bathroom. And then the young couple had basically would be a 3-bedroom home with a home theatre and, an ensuite and a bathroom. So in practical sense, it's very much what a lot of people are building, but just 2 people. Whereas this was actually designed to allow 5 people to live in somewhat harmony, have some availability of grandma to come and catch up with the kids, but not feeling like everyone was needing to be in everyone's grill. So, and the design was a little bit factored by the fact that there was a situation where this was a corner allotment. So it actually allowed for a shed to be built in future so that there would be almost access from the patio into the shed to be able to walk off the site. So it's interesting that the true intent of this fed into the design. So this would have been one of those very few designs which would have been done with the main intent of satisfying the people. Yeah. And when I walked into it, when it was finished, it actually had a real sense of working.
Did it?
It did. And I went back there quite some time later. And they, my wife and I have talked about this a little bit, like what would a multi-generational home look like for us? And we've only just, even in the last couple of weeks, even had this conversation about, the boys have still got some time at university to go. Where would they go after university is finished? My parents aren't getting any younger, and the place is actually becoming quite difficult for them to look after. And my sister is in Brisbane and doesn't want to come to a proper regional location like Townsville. But, is there some point in time where we might, due to necessity, just need to be not in any other reason, but need to be considering, hey, do we need a multi-generational place? And that might be the only way we can afford to live that way, is by sorting that out. Now, most people get jammed together by accident, right? And then there's all these issues with, Dad's giving me the shits now that he's with me, or whatever, or you're always up in my grill and I need a sense of space. And but if you design with the intent and you think about it, that example there says it can work. Like, it can really work.
And I guess that's an important part to highlight, is it doesn't have to work perfectly, Darren.
Yes.
Like, if you just sketch out, this is the intent that we have, it needs to be multi-generational, and we're all cat people, or we're all, whatever your basic sketch. There will be days where it doesn't work, but that's okay. The majority of time you'll come back to, oh yeah, on principle this works. In extreme wet weather, I get wet going from the garage to the kitchen with my groceries, but that's one day a year. So in the grand scheme of things, that's probably, I can live with that.
Absolutely. And I also think one thing that's interesting, and I think it's only by the evolution of people, purpose, place that this occurred to me, is that the reason we've been spending so much time on the people and the purpose component is that's the bit that's missing from the design. And that's even the bit that's missing from multi-generational designs. So although we're talking out there about being a solution to the housing crisis, or being a solution, to the housing crisis, I also think we're just a solution for anyone who's thinking about living differently. So I think multi-generational living, or even succession planning and all these things, is a role that we have to play as well. So those people, now we know what we now know, we could also say, why don't we talk about agreements? Like these homes were just purely about the living experience. They weren't about how do you actually, as a group of humans, live in this place and find a way to be cohesive
over time. Yeah.
And that might be as much about multi-generational as it might be about 4 random people living together, or 4 people who come together with their own intent, which is completely different to being related. And I think that's a very important distinction.
How do you see the rent to buy? That sort of seems to be the current flavour of response. We'll fund a heap of projects to be rent to buy, so there'll be a price point, or people can get in at a rental kind of cost with hopefully eventually get some equity in the property. That's an intent.
Yes.
But they're still missing the whole human intent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think financial intent, isn't it? And we're back to, if the finances are most important, if the status is most important, if the, what is the most important thing? And is human connection the most important thing? And what we're told by all of the researchers and clinical psychologists and, that whole branch of study, is that the first thing human beings need is, and in fact, it often precedes shelter, is connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
100%.
If you haven't included that in your purpose, in your intention, it's not going to turn up, is it?
We want to make X many widgets so that people can get in at a rental cost and eventually own them. That's just a purely financial story.
It's financial, and it's about, the unfortunate thing is that it's going to be about the government putting out a huge amount of money and some clever people taking advantage of that and making a killing, and the rest of us taxpayers have subsidized somebody else making a killing.
Exactly. In the history of time, we've seen that again and again.
Yeah. Smells bad.
Yeah.
Doesn't pass the pub test.
No. And it's interesting too. I mean, even some of the discussions, that we're having at the moment is that, that whole idea of not in my backyard, some of that comes about because you're just providing the building solution without actually thinking about the human solution. So the rent to buy on face value makes a lot of sense, right? But
totally.
if you don't think about how the humans are actually going to live in that space and how they're going to organize themselves and make decisions and have difficult conversations and all of that sort of stuff, then you have no hope of making that something that's sustainable over time. No doubt. So yeah, I mean it's a very, very good segue, Colby, maybe into the next randomized version. This one will give everyone a headache. So this is actually 3 slides, which will probably have to be played together. So this is actually the upper story of a design, which is essentially the design is around about 7 meters wide by about 9 meters long. So this is the upper story, which is a little kitchen. And this is what it looks like. So this was actually a house which was built on 70 square meters of land.
Oh my
Wow.
God.
Uh,
How big's the house? The whole 70 square meters, I suppose.
Well, almost by two, like so. When you see the other floor plan, I think it shows the garage as a single garage, literally a little bit downstairs, and then some stairs upstairs to the bedroom. Yeah, there you are. So you walk in the door. There's your open plan living, and then essentially you go up the stairs and away you go into the upper story. So interestingly enough, this was an idea that was originally floated by one of the Queensland government organisations about how do we address affordability. And if you go back to the elevation there, Colby, which just has the actual pretty picture of it from the front. The idea of it was, and this actually did work in this instance, as far as the young woman who went into this property was actually a nurse, and she had a registered nurse from memory, so had some lending capabilities, but not enough to get a whole normal residential building. So this, from memory, was around about somewhere between $250,000 and $270,000. Which is actually a threshold that has been seen as possibly affordable as in you can get a loan for it as a single person. So that was really the economic intent, was to say, well, what can you get if you reverse out of affordable dollar values? So that was, and then it said, well, you can only have 70 square meters of land. Well, then how do you design for 70 square meters of land? So the answer is you need to have 2 stories, otherwise you can't fit anything on there. And this lady actually had a small puppy dog, and there was about 1.5 meters worth of land at the back that went onto the fence, and that was enough for a micro dog to run around, because also they did design a park, so there was a short distance to some of the local parks.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a step up for her to be able to walk out the door. Now, so one thing it did deliver on, it was, in that time, like today, it would not be affordable, because that thing now would be worth, which is again how this whole thing gets broken. It's probably still now a $350,000, $400,000 thing, which is just bizarre. But it did, at its point in time, it was affordable. So it was capable of a single female being able to purchase it. With a good job, like obviously, if you didn't have enough serviceable income, you wouldn't be. It was freehold title, so you were able to buy and sell that without having any other, requirement to jump through any other hoops. Now, its limitation was, on the other side of that street was the garage of the villa design, which was going the other way. So literally, these were on either side of a small laneway. So on one side, you have a garage going to another villa, and this little one would be beside another garage. So essentially, this would be facing, the front door is facing a laneway, if you can imagine that. And beside this garage would be another garage, which would go to a property which was behind this property. So beside and behind. And then on the other side of the road is garages facing into the lane. So I was originally very hopeful for this concept, right? But when I went there, I went, oh shit. You've got all of your, like, even think about logistic things. Where is everyone putting their wheelie bins?
Yeah.
Road.
Out on the road. And if you're right on that laneway and you've got 25 houses with 2 wheelie bins, it's a mess, right? And someone only has to leave the wheelie bin off the curb a little bit, and then everyone's yelling out there, yelling at each other, Deco, why have you put that out here? Now, also the other part I found is, from a passive surveillance point of view, I was a bit eerie. Like, I would be walking down there of an afternoon going, like, I've got nowhere to run, right? So if I was jumping...
Right, it was the dark alley feeling.
Yeah. So I was polyvagal, we get into that world, I could actually have a sense that I was being hyper vigilant around me.
Right.
Now, some of that might have just been, hey, if a car sneaks up behind me and runs into me, or if someone jumps out and even says boo, I'm just going to end up with a brown set of shorts. It might not have been about death, but my polyvagal system was absolutely being triggered. Now, single female living in that house.
Yeah.
Does your safety just disappear, even though you've got the most perfect building solution? But is everything we know about being home eradicated?
Yeah.
Can't feel
And
safe.
and thus you get the feeling that if you aren't in your four walls, you're not safe.
Yes. So that's a very good point. We almost become more isolated by trying to, build our safety, which is lock the front door, don't want to speak to anyone because we don't know where they've came from. Go upstairs and lock yourself in there. And everything we've said about the human needs thing is connection. So we've just built the perfect housing solution, which destroyed everything that makes you a human.
Perfect jail cell.
Perfect jail cell. Absolutely. So interesting. I mean, it's a great argument, but when you look at it now with today's lens, and now we look at this idea that the government's saying, oh, we should have all these rent to buy or build to rent options, even, saying, hey, you developers get in there. Who's talking about the people going in there and how safe they're going to feel in that environment? It's dollars and cents economics. And that's what that solution was, a beautiful economic solution that could rightly petrify someone to death.
And that is the same problem with packing people into small high-rise flats, isn't it?
100%. And I found it interesting that one of the latest couple of incidents I've seen in Brisbane, where there's been a stabbing and then they didn't get there on time and the person passed away. There was another one where there was the person had rung 911 or 000, and ultimately they hadn't got there in time, and they couldn't even find them in the tower because the address they'd given them was a tower, right? So it took them another day, and the person had been dead for a day to find where they were. So no, and the police now are getting pulled over the coals because they weren't able to locate this person. It turned out to be domestic violence and all this other stuff. But this is all of those things that I've seen in the background when I've seen those examples. They're either high density without thought or towers. Yeah. So everything we're saying is absolutely just happening in real life. We're not just making this whole protection and connection thing and safety thing up. It's literally happening in front of our eyes. Literally, those things are occurring each week.
Yeah, and we'll only continue to escalate while we look at it purely with the financial lens. So if we just say this meets X plus Y equals X many $1.50, we're all in. If that's the only way we're going to assess projects, which is ultimately how development is done.
Yeah.
Do we get an appropriate yield for our investors' money? Oh, yes, we do. Or full steam ahead. We bulldoze it, we tick the appropriate boxes, get through the appropriate regulation, and assemble this collection of stuff to make a thing. And then you go and throw some humans in it and go, well, what happened?
We had the perfect object and these humans mucked it up.
I built this thing, but it didn't actually work for any human.
Absolutely. Which might even be a good segue, Colby, into Ginn Road, if you can bring up the floor plan for it. Now, interestingly enough, this might be a very poignant conversation coming up very soon. But ultimately, Ginn Road is an amazing location. And one of the first things you realize is that any housing design which puts the bedrooms in a cluster enables one of you to have a really good view. So, and I quite often used to comment to people, they used to say, well, I've got the bedroom one or the master suite. So that's the priority for the view, right? Now, in all the world of hierarchical political nightmare you'd have with that even thinking, everyone does it all the time, right? Like I'm paying the money, so I'm getting the view, and the rest of you guys can whatever. So literally, this designer said, we've got a beautiful view looking down the block. Why not allow everyone to have an equal feeling of that?
Outlook. Yep.
And because we've got beautiful orientation, it also means that the sun is on either end of the short walls, which from a solar design point of view means its intent has also been to be as energy efficient as it can. And, you know, we know that some people, and I know there's now some argument about this in the neuroscience world, but, you know, we know that some people like to wake up early and some people like to sleep in. And I know it's interesting, as you mentioned before, Christine, about how we eventually know more about these things and we change our view of them. But the idea would be that, you know, out on the right-hand side, as you look at this design, is the eastern side, and out on the other side is the western side. So the intent of this was to say, if you like to sleep in the morning, well, you probably might want to be on the western end because it's going to be in the shade most of the time. If you're up and gone early or want to even be sparked by the sun, then the bedroom number one is probably a good option for you. And as a part of that, you'll notice utilitarian of living. So everyone in this house has got exactly the same access to a bathroom. So you don't have, I've got the ensuite and you five guys have to look after, you know, chase yourself around in here or bump into each other. Your core human needs are being delivered, truly allowing you to be the best version of you. You have your own space, you have your own place, but in the core heart of the property, there's a place for us truly to come together. That surprisingly by its design is also, you know, in Breezeway 1 and Breezeway 2 situation, is always going to be in shade all day, every day of the year in the tropics. You'll be able to find a section of the breezeway to move to where you can go, I'm in the shade, I'm out of the sun. It gives me a place where I can be connected with the environment, but still not blasted by what can be our quite harsh conditions here. So again, this will be an interesting experiment. Like, we don't have the answers. This is its intent. But it'll be so fascinating when people come into this home, and even as we show more people this design, if you know why we've done it, how do you feel about that? Like, does it give you a sense of your ability to be you, but a true place that you can be part of a group? And this will be intriguing to see how people see our intent as a part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. It has our thinking over decades has considered that every solution needs to have at least 6 elements considered. You know, so that our intention is at least a 6-fold intention, not just a pure financial intention.
Yeah.
And for each of us, you know, one of those might have a priority. For Christine herself at the moment, health is perhaps a higher priority because of your experience of your home environment degrading your health, and you going, oh, hang on, that's actually having a real immediate impact.
But we also, something else that we probably, about that design is, it's probably the first design, and I've only just thought about this while we were talking, where I've truly been considerate of respecting the occupant's need for individual space and facilitating people's ability to operate as a group. I can honestly say this is the first time I've ever had that design intent. And I bet there's probably nothing like it, I'd be guessing, but there's probably nothing like it with that design intent out there in Australia currently, which is saying we respect that you need your individual needs protected, but we also want to facilitate a way that true human connection thing that makes it home is even amplified. We're amplifying it. We're not just, you're not finding a way to make this a home. It's helping you be home.
Right.
Yeah.
Come together, sit around the fire, have those conversations, laugh, occasionally drink too much and fall over, eat too much and regret it the next day and have to go and do gardening. Be connected with your environment. Get to know your fellow humans. So just as I said that, I think it's probably the first time I've ever thought of design in that way. And you go, if that was its intent, then that's a pretty good intention to have, I think.
Absolutely. And professionally, I think that's a natural evolution of our strive to continue to evolve our thinking and our application. So Thankfully, I'm not the same person that I was when I first looked at the Pavilion Home and saw all this additional material and thought, I made all these additional sales. Thankfully, we evolve, there is this human potential to continue to evolve our thinking. And even if we reflect on our 18-year-old self, and it's lovely to hear Hunter's made a progression in a few short years.
Yeah.
But from 18, where it is the first understanding of the world being your oyster and the world revolves entirely around you and you've got all the answers, which is a wonderful stage to be at. But it doesn't take you long to work out that's a bit delusional and we need to be connected with others.
Absolutely. I think that's probably a really great place to wind up this episode. I think we've gone on a bit of a journey and we've really, delved into what intention can be about design and also that there's no right answer. One thing we haven't discussed there is even just renovating your existing space to be thinking about that intent. So how do I honor the human, the individual, but how do I then foster a sense of collaboration and community? And then really the most important bits we've sort of, I think, got to is that you then need to have the agreements and the rest of our toolbox to help you. And this is only a help and a hope to allow you to operate better as a group. We know humans are difficult at the best of times, but if we can try to find a way to make you be a better, more cohesive group, then why not let the design help you get there? So we might be able to have a check out, and I would like to say thank you to Christine for soldiering on and getting through it. We love having you here, but we also are conscious of the fact we don't want to overdo our welcome. So I think thanks for soldiering on. So that can be my checkout.
Thanks, Darren, and thanks for holding that space for me as my checkout, where I feel I can be here or not be here as my health goes up and down. Thank you for that.
Awesome.
Absolute pleasure. And the last to check out is just a gratitude again for this conversation. Look forward to continuing next Monday. Hopefully this is starting to resonate for a few of those listeners with our awareness about the thing can be developed with some intention other than just the numbers, dollars and cents, because that could lead to far, far greater individual, household, and I absolutely believe community benefit.
Yeah. Perfect place to finish. Well said, mate.
All needed drastically in this world.
Totally.
Thanks.
Catch up again next Monday.
Thank you very much. Thanks all.
See you later.